Shbua Tov, everyone. Welcome to Killer Tell's Saturday Night Zoom Stories, session number 3. This story was told by the Tolna Rebbe at a Yud Aleph Nisan celebration in Jerusalem in 1978. He heard the story from the nephew of his daughter, and he testified that before he dared to tell it in public, he verified and rechecked all the details with his grandnephew, who heard it from the husband in the story. In the winter of 2017-18, so his grandnephew, the Tolna, had been in New York. He was on he had been in the United States, and he was on a plane back to Israel. And right across the aisle from him was sitting a very strictly religious-looking man with two boys. And as usual, so they got to talking and discussing, why what they were doing in the States and what's going on with them in Israel. And the father of these two boys, told him this amazing story. He said that he and his wife are strictly Litvish couple. That is the Lithuanian stream of Judaism, very non-Hasidic, very religious, part of the Orthodox community, very religious, but also very, very not Hasidic. And they live in Kiryat Sefer, which is a community out between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, closer to Tel Aviv, which is also a very non-Hasidic community. And he and his wife had been married for 10 years, but and had no children. And this brought about a lot of friction between them, and the marriage was unraveling. So he thought that maybe it would be a good idea for them to divorce. After all, this is the recommendation of the Torah. It's not a decree, but it's a recommendation. A couple that has been married for 10 years and haven't had children, and all medical options are exhausted. So, they could, maybe it's better for them to divorce and remarry, and maybe they'll each have children that way. He decided to talk this over with his main teacher when he had been a student at the Panovich Yeshiva, probably the most prestigious and famous Litvish yeshiva in Eretz Israel, in Israel here. And he told his teacher, his Rav, all these thoughts that were going through his head. And the rabbi said to him, look, there aren't so many occasions where the Torah endorses divorce, but this certainly seems to be one of them. But in that case, you should speak to your wife about it tonight. Go home and speak to her about it. The husband was reluctant because he figured this would start another fight, yet another fight. But his teacher insisted, you have to speak about it to her now. Since you have these thoughts in your mind, you must speak to her about it. So he went home and he opened this discussion with his wife about maybe they should get divorced. It would be better for both of them. Maybe because they could get remarried and perhaps they would have children. It was a very intense discussion. It went on for hours, and finally they both were very emotionally drained, and they went to sleep. In the middle of the night, like after midnight, the wife had a dream. In her dream, she saw the Lubavitcher Rebbe. She recognized him, I assume, from posters, newspapers, etc. And in the dream, the Rebbe said to her, I know that you and your husband are discussing divorce. Before taking the next step, let me tell you that many years ago, when your husband was in those years when the Bnei Brak community was very fiercely opposed to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and the Chabad movement. Your husband was a student at Panovich, and he was one of the ringleaders of the group that spoke strongly against me, wrote terrible things about me, and stirred up opposition to So you should tell him that he should speak to a Rav, a rabbi that decides Jewish law. He should speak to a Rav about what he should do about this. She woke up very suddenly. She was very disturbed. She shook her husband awake, and she said, "I had this dream about the Lubavitcher Rebbe came to me in a dream, and he said da 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 da." And she said, "Is that true?" And he got very upset. She woke him up. She woke him up to tell him about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who's not a fan of, to say the least. And she was challenging him. So he said, "Leave me alone with this nonsense." He went back to sleep. An hour later, he woke her up. He had the same dream. This time he had to take it a lot more seriously. The next day he went back to Panovich to speak again with his teacher. And the rabbi said to him, "Look, this is much too incredible to believe. It's hard for me to believe, but I see that you believe it. So if you're going to take it at face value, so then you should know the applicable halacha, how Jewish law applies in this situation. You have to go to the burial place of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and you have to go there with a minyan. And at his graveside, you have to confess that what you did, what you tell me that you did, and you have to then ask forgiveness. But your confession about what you did has to be very specific, all the details, everything you told me, how you spoke against him, your articles against him, you organized others against him, etc. So the student, the husband took it seriously. He said, "All right, I'm going to do this." And he was about to go. The rabbi said to him, "Let me give you one piece of advice. When you're gathering the minyan, don't include any Lubavitchers in it. Who knows what they'll do to you when they hear your confession." The husband smiled. He said, "That's not a problem. My brother-in-law heads a kollel, which is like a yeshiva, an advanced yeshiva for married students, for young married Jewish men, and I'm sure he'll arrange for the." And indeed, that's what happened. As soon as he was able, he flew to New York, and his brother arranged the minyan, and he went with the minyan to the Quarrel, as it's called, the place where the Lubavitcher Rebbe is buried in Montefiore Cemetery in Queens. And there he did as instructed. He confessed in great detail how he had dishonored the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he asked his forgiveness. He went back to Israel, and 1 year to the date that he had been at the Ohel, his wife gave birth to twin boys. And he said, and he told the grandnephew of the Tolna Rebbe that every year, on the anniversary of when he went to the Ohel to ask forgiveness of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, every year he flies there with his sons to tell them, to repeat to them the story of what happened and warn them of the dangers of speaking negatively against the stock. The Tolna Rebbe, when he first told the story, concluded by saying, you can see the extraordinariness and the uniqueness of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that he troubles himself so much for a couple of people that were the opposite of Hasidim, and including one who was acted like his enemy. But that's the role of a Rebbe, to help every Jew, even those that are opposed to them.
I thought he met him on the plane.